Hello and welcome to the Progress Theory, where we discuss scientific principles for optimizing human performance. I am Dr. Phil Price, and on today's episode, we are joined by hybrid athlete and coach Alec Blenis. It's easier to understand the programming going into strength and endurance sports individually. However, hybrid programming is a little bit more complex, and that's what makes it so exciting. However, what's the best hybrid programming recommendations? In this episode, Alec discusses his journey into hybrid training, his current goals, and what he has learnt so far. On top of that, we discuss how to dissect your hybrid goals so you know how to program, and how do we balance strength and endurance training. As always, follow and subscribe to The Progress Theory on Instagram, YouTube, and check out all of our other episodes. Here is Alec Blenis. Alec, how are we?
I'm doing well, Phil. Thank you so much for having me on.
Thank you so much for coming on to the Progress Theory. I know you're busy training for a particular event at the moment, so thank you for taking the time in your busy schedule to come speak with us, especially everything hybrid training. And, you know, I've seen your Instagram, you put out so much valuable information, so it would be really good to delve into that a little bit more.
Yeah, I'm excited to get to talk about hybrid training and talk about Murph and all that good stuff.
Yeah, before we get into that, do you want to tell the viewers a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so I'm a hybrid athlete. I'm a coach. I've been coaching with a company called Complete Human Performance for, close to a decade at this point. My original background, I was one of the first members of the Spartan Race Pro team. So I raced on the Spartan Pro circuit for a number of years. Got into ultra running, did a number of like 50 plus mile mountain races, that kind of thing. And then dabbled in CrossFit and strength/physique sports a little bit as well. So I've done a little bit of everything. And at this point, I continue to try to pursue a little bit of all those different avenues. Most recently, I set the world record for the fastest Murph. So the famous Memorial Day workout, the 1 mile run, 100 pull-ups, 200 push-ups, 300 squats, 1 mile run. I set the record for that last year, and I'm going after it again this year in hopes of improving my time. So that's a bit about me.
No, that's really awesome. What made you want to go for Murph?
Murph is one of those workouts. It's a hero WOD. So it's in honor of Lieutenant Michael Murphy, which is super cool, and it's been part of the CrossFit tradition for a number of years now. So I've done variations of the workout a number of times over the years, but I had never tried to do the weighted and unpartitioned version. So unpartitioned meaning doing all of the pull-ups before moving on to all of the push-ups, etc., as opposed to breaking it up into chunks as people often do. And so last year I had seen a fellow Spartan racer, Hunter McIntyre, had set the world record for the unpartitioned Murph with a time of, I believe, 34:13. I was like, oh, that's pretty cool. I should try that. And having raced against Hunter a number of times, I knew he was always the superior athlete, right? Like I had raced with him or close to him, but I'd never actually bested him in a competition. So I kind of put his time up there as, maybe I'll get close to that or whatever. Last Memorial Day. And to my surprise, I actually beat it by a couple of seconds unofficially on Memorial Day. It's like, well, that was kind of a shock to me, right? So then I organized an official record attempt just a couple weeks later, ended up actually taking 2 minutes off the time. So I kind of stumbled into it. I didn't have any plans initially to set the Murph world record. I was just doing Murph on Memorial Day with everyone else, and I'd seen what Hunter had done and set that as a target. And when I realized that I could beat it, I figured, I got to make it official now.
No, that's wicked. Nice progression, just going from, I'm doing it because I enjoy it, to all of a sudden, actually, I can do something really good here, and you start beating times. How's training going for your next attempt?
The training's going really well. I had a little bit of a snag a couple weeks ago. I got sick. I don't know if it was COVID or what. I didn't end up testing for it, but it just made cardio feel awful for a couple of weeks. But the strength side has been progressing really, really nicely. Some of my runs haven't gone as well as I'd hoped, but I did a practice run or a dress rehearsal just this last weekend and actually took 40 seconds off my best time from last year. So I was a little bit sore from that, but all in all, it wasn't too bad. So now the taper period begins. We're 7 days out right now. So I had a nice workout this morning, and things are basically getting easier from here. So setting that record or beating my record in training this weekend was a nice confidence boost. So now I just got to trust that the fitness is still there a week from now and hope that the weather turns out and all that good stuff on competition day.
What changes did you make to training in comparison to your last attempt? What did you feel like you needed to progress on to knock those seconds off?
Yeah, that's a good question. Last year, I hadn't actually put in a ton of specific training, right? Because I was just kind of going into Murph on Memorial Day with everyone else, just kind of doing the training you always do. And, oh, it's Memorial Day, so we're going to do this workout, right? And then when I realized that I could set the record, I did just a couple weeks of kind of practice workouts for it, pacing, strategizing, that kind of thing. But I really only had 2 to 3 weeks of training before last year's record attempt. This year, I've been thinking about it since probably February. I've been training for 16 solid weeks with a big emphasis on Murph. So a lot more pre-fatigued running. So a lot of doing, lots of high volume squats, etc. immediately before runs. A lot more just body weight stuff and muscular endurance stuff in general. So the training overall has been much more focused on Murph and much more focused on kind of those longer hero WOD type workouts in general this year. So I would hope that my fitness all in all would be a little bit better. The one thing that I feel is the running just hasn't felt as good as I would have liked. But overall, muscular endurance is better this year. More than anything, I've improved even more on the push-ups, which I think is really how I got the record last year. My push-ups were much better than Hunter's. And then in my practice run this weekend, I took another minute and a half or so off my push-up split. So chest training has gone very, very well just by focusing a lot more on those push-ups.
That's what we like to hear when chest training goes well.
Yep.
Have you aimed for a specific split time with your runs? So, for example, you want to hit a specific split time with your first mile and second mile, and your training has kind of been just over and just below that, depending on what the aim of the session was.
Yeah, so the run splits for Murph are not terribly fast compared to an all-out effort, right? It's realistically a fairly small portion of the overall event, and you can easily go too hard for a number of reasons. One thing I've really noticed is when you run hard enough and you get kind of that surge of blood into your legs as your body's trying to get those legs moving, blood leaves other parts of your body, right? So all the blood is in your legs to support that run, and all of a sudden you go to do a set of pull-ups and you have no blood in your arms, and you're basically doing like blood flow restriction training, right? Like you're trying to jump into those 100 pull-ups and all of your blood is in your lower body, and all of a sudden pull-ups are much, much tougher than you're accustomed to. And I found that by backing off the pace on the runs, and it feels much more comfortable, I'm able to redirect that blood flow, get into some of the upper body endurance sets, and they just feel much, much easier. So overall, in terms of pacing, I'm typically running that first mile around like a 5 to 10K effort, if not a little bit slower with the weight vest. So if I was going to run a mile all out with the weight vest on, I might do a 5:15 or something like that. I'll probably run closer to a 6-minute mile, which it's certainly not easy, but it shouldn't be too much of a strain. That allows me to jump into those pull-ups and feel really, really good right out of the gate. What I saw even with Hunter's record attempt or record-setting run in 2020 was he went out really, really hard on the run, on the pull-ups as well, and then kind of burned out. I think his upper body just got exhausted. So my pacing strategy is much different. I start off pretty easy. I think some of the people watching last year's record attempt were nervous for me, just seeing how slow I was moving early on, thinking I might not get it, but then it progressively gets faster, and I kind of fly through the push-ups and the squats, and end up having a fair amount of energy left for the second run. My goal this year is to run the first mile in around 6 minutes, and then hopefully the second mile around 6 or maybe 6:30, depending on how fatigued I am.
How much of a difference does going partitioned or unpartitioned make to Murph?
Oh, it's a huge difference. It's a completely different workout. So for me, partitioned with the weight vest might be a 22-minute workout or so. Unpartitioned, maybe a 30 to 32-minute workout. So talking like a 10-minute difference or so, which, in a workout of that duration is a pretty substantial percentage. So partitioned is much, much faster. You're doing the same total workload, but in much less time. So it's a much more intense cardiovascular stimulus for me. It's much more exhausting, much more sweaty, just all in all more painful, I would say. The unpartitioned format, it becomes much more about just the muscular endurance to keep those sets moving quickly. And to be honest, it's a little bit anxiety inducing in the sense it's like, okay, this is my strategy. This is how quickly I want to do these push-ups. I hope I can, right? Hopefully I don't burn out. Hopefully I don't reach that point of fatigue. But all in all, like for example, the push-ups have been taking me about 6 minutes. It's not terribly difficult, right? Like I'm doing very quick sets of 8. I'm catching my breath. I'm not very winded at that point. It's just kind of like fingers crossed that my chest, shoulders, and triceps don't fall apart on me, right? And then of course it gets really painful again for the final run. But you kind of have that middle phase during the bodyweight movements where you're not particularly tired. You're just kind of trusting the training, hoping for the best, sticking to your strategy. And it's really only painful kind of a little bit towards the end. But partition is a whole different ballgame. It's just pure pain the entire time.
With the partition, did you have to build up that large number of pull-ups, for example, by, I don't know, starting off with a set of 3, very short rest, set of 3, very short rest, just to avoid the musculature involved with the pull-ups just pooling, and then all of a sudden they just can't generate that force production as well? And then did you then build it up over time? So then you were like, okay, I can either manipulate the rest period, or I can go 4 reps every time, or 5 reps and just build up. Because I know you mentioned you do like sets of 8. I wonder if had you built up to that level, and that's a almost like a pull-up pace you can sustain over that many pull-ups.
Yeah, so I've tried a number of different pacing strategies for the push-ups and the pull-ups, trying to find that sweet spot in terms of how many reps per set, and then what's the rest between sets and all that kind of thing. The pull-ups, I find I get into a little bit more of a rhythm, if you will. There's kind of an energetic cost to starting a set of good kipping or butterfly pull-ups. So I didn't want to have to do too many sets and waste the energy of getting down from the bar, jumping back to the bar, etc. So I figured, what's the most I can do in a set without running the risk of fatigue? And I settled on sets of 10 for the most part for pull-ups. So right now my strategy is 10 sets of 10 on the pull-ups with 1 set every 20 seconds. And I've also built in a little bit of margin for error on that one. So if I have to take an extra set or 2 to get those done, that's where I've allotted myself a little bit of time. For the push-ups, last year, for the record, I did 40 sets of 5. Very, very quick sets of 5, be like 5 very quick reps, take a breath, another 5 reps, take a breath kind of thing. So it was 5 reps every 12 seconds on average, which ends up being about 25 or so per minute. So 8 minutes worth of work if you stick to that pace all the way through. This year, I just tried out, trying to save a little bit of time, 25 sets of 8 with 8 reps every 15 seconds, which has been like 32 per minute or so. I ended up getting those done in just over 6 minutes. So definitely a faster pace in the push-ups, but I've experimented with a lot of strategies. The key is keeping it very submaximal, and you should stay very far away from, as many as you can do in a set. With the weight vest on, if I just did 1 set, as many as possible in push-ups, for instance, I could probably do between 70 and 90, maybe 70 and 100 reps or so. But if I decided to just do 1 big set of 50 or 60 to start, I'd be completely wrecked, right? And then I would struggle and take, 10, 15 minutes to finish out the rest of them. So you really got to focus on quick, efficient movements, small sets that are not fatiguing, and then just try to keep those rest breaks short.
I love how you've broken the sport down. It's like Murph is the sport here, and you've broken it down to the point where, okay, there are a number of different ways to achieve this, but which is the most optimal way? And through trial and error and training, you found that way, which I think is absolutely wicked. And I really hope that you break the record again. And I'll keep a lookout on Instagram to make sure that you do it. I can't wait to see it.
Thank you very much. Yeah, and at this point, I feel like the expression, the hay is in the barn, or that the training has been done. Just have to trust that it's all going to come through for me. There's always factors outside of my control and whatnot. There's weather and all this kind of stuff. But I feel really good about it. I'm excited. My strategy will hopefully pay off. but we'll see. It all goes down Monday, May 30th around noon Central Time.
Brilliant. I'll keep an eye out. How did you get into hybrid training? Because I know you said that you started in the OCR world and then you went to ultra endurance, which seems to be quite common. People get into running or running sports and then they extend it to the longer races. But from then, it's when you started doing CrossFit and you started incorporating more strength elements to your training, which has led to this sort of hybrid style. What was it about your about hybrid training that made you think, actually, I don't really just want to run here. I want to do a number of things. What got you into hybrid training?
Yeah, I think it goes back all the way to being like a kid, right? Like middle school sports and everything. Hybrid training, people used to just call exercise, right? Like it's strength and conditioning. Like we make it this new kind of complicated niche sport, but people have been exercising and doing a wide variety of things for a long time. The kind of newer, more odd thing to do is to specialize. Be like, no, I'm not going to do all this stuff. I'm just going to run. Like to me, that's kind of the weirder thing. But when I was growing up, I played a number of sports. Like I did football, I did cross country, track and field, soccer, wrestling, right? And I didn't really care if I was good at it. For example, I was not a great football player, as many people could probably imagine based on my my size. But it was fun, right? Like I liked going out with my friends. I liked going into the weight room with the football team, like all this kind of stuff. So I would do that one season. I would do cross country one season. I would bounce around between these sports. And I didn't really want to pick one. I just kind of kept doing it all. And it's like, I may not be great at any of this stuff, but like, it's just fun to do. And that kind of was the theme throughout high school and college. I started to, I guess, specialize a little bit. I kind of gravitated more naturally to the track and field and cross country side of things, but I kept doing the strength training. And then I stumbled across Spartan race and saw a race was going on nearby and thought it looked fun. And I think just the background that I had in some of those other sports like football and wrestling and that kind of thing, I was stronger than most of the cross country and track guys. I wasn't super strong by any means, but stronger than most people my speed. So when I came across that first obstacle race in 2011, I actually did really well. I podiumed. I got third place at my first event, and I was hooked. I was like, this is super cool. This is super fun. I love the combo. So I ended up actually not doing school sports at that point anymore. I was just like, I want to run Spartan race. I want to do obstacle course racing. This is the funnest thing ever. And that was basically my entry into hybrid training. I think I ran like 25, 30 events in like my first year or something, just going around the country and doing them all. And then from there, just hybrid athletics has since exploded past OCR to like, you get high rocks, for example, DecaFit, and then of course you got CrossFit, which is a whole different breed of hybrid training. So there's so many different avenues that you can, use to explore this combination of strength and speed and endurance. The possibilities are really endless.
Yeah, definitely. It's so easy to see the appeal, isn't it? In the UK, a lot of people, they're in their teens and their 20s, say for guys, play rugby, they play football, and they come to the end of their careers, and then it gets to a point where, well, I want to continue being an athlete. I need something competitive to make sure that it helps me with my training. It helps me develop goals. But I don't really want to, I'm not going to be elite at anything. I would like to try a number of different things. And by doing that, you need a wide range of physical qualities to be able to do that. So a lot of people seem to gravitate to this type of hybrid training, but very much like you said, strength and conditioning. It's being strong and conditioned. So I can see why it's so popular, and I think CrossFit has taken advantage of that. We've got high rocks, we've got a number of different things that are now, there's a huge amount of people that want to be competitive in this space, and so many companies have created almost like sports to cater for that. So it's really quite exciting to see, one, the cultural side of it and how it can how it's exploding, but two, also to see how far we can go with this idea of how strong can you be and how fit can you be, and things like your Murph attempts and people like Fergus Crawley doing powerlifting and ultra endurance stuff. They're really testing the human limits, and I think it's just a really, really exciting space at the moment. So it's always nice to hear different people's origin stories and how they got into it.
I think it's great because it makes fitness more accessible for the general public. When you see a lot of people look at certain sports, if we rewind 10, 20 years ago, you'd look at someone who is considering, getting into weightlifting or powerlifting, and they're like, well, I don't want to do that because like those guys can't even climb a flight of stairs without getting winded, and I don't know if that's really healthy or whatever. And then like, well, I don't want to do marathoning because those people all break their knees or they're too skinny or whatever. And there's always these things that people don't want to give up. They don't want to do this sport because they don't want to give up this, or they don't want to do this sport because they don't want to give up that. But now with the rise of hybrid training, there's not really that excuse or that reason.
How far do you think hybrid athletes can go? Where do you see it going? I asked Evan Pycon the same question on the previous episode, and people are, hitting out like 250 kilo squats and doing ultra marathons on the same day. Where do you think it could go? Do you think it could be very similar to like, okay, here's Murph. What are the record times? Here's this particular challenge. What is the record times for that? Where do you think the limits of human performance could go?
Yeah. I feel like to ask how far hybrid training can go is almost an impossible question, given how many different directions it can go. Right. I think a lot of people, when they think about the limits of human performance in terms of hybrid training, they think of extreme strength and extreme endurance because people naturally want to think about the extremes. So they're like, how heavy could someone deadlift, or like some sort of powerlifting or strongman type endeavor with like an ultra marathon, which is certainly a very cool, way to go about hybrid training. But I don't think that's necessarily any more extreme or impressive than, for example, a high level CrossFitter that can still, do 100 pull-ups and snatch X amount of weight and whatever. To me, that's just as extreme and impressive and cool, even if it doesn't necessarily span the extremes in terms of absolute weight lifted or distance run or whatever. So there's so many different directions that hybrid training can go that to me, it's almost impossible to ask how far can it go, just given that endless variety. If I had to think of something that would be particularly challenging, I would think combining some sort of very high power explosive sport like Olympic weightlifting with some sort of very endurance focused and high impact thing like running. So combining like a 100-mile run with a very impressive snatch and clean and jerk or something like that. I think that'd be a very tough combo in the hybrid training space. But as I said, there's so much variety. I think it'll be very interesting to see all the cool combinations that people come up with.
Yeah, definitely. Why do you think weightlifting plus the 100-miler would be particularly impressive? Is that because of the high threshold motor units that are required for such an explosive lift? And then all of a sudden you're doing all this huge volume of training to be able to run 100 miles, which will probably start to fatigue those high threshold motor units. So, you've got this crossover effect. Is that what you think that's probably why, or one of the reasons why that would be an impressive feat?
Yeah, I think that those two adaptations, so like a lot of the adaptations surrounding rate of force production and motor unit recruitment are somewhat antagonistic to some of the endurance adaptations, more so than just maximal force production, I would say, and more so than hypertrophy. Everyone is always like, cardio kills your gains and you can't get big while doing endurance training and all that kind of stuff. And while there's, an element of truth to all of these types of things, you can certainly still get very big and maintain significant lean mass while engaged in endurance training. I'd say that's less of an issue than maintaining your strength. And then maintaining your strength is less of an issue even still compared to maintaining your maximal rate of force production and explosive power. To me, that's the thing that takes the quickest hit, especially when dealing with the fatigue of endurance training. When you start ramping the mileage up and getting a little bit tired, the first thing that I see go, or the first fitness attribute that I see kind of take a hit, is that explosive power. So to me, being able to manage those two things successfully, if we could see someone make it to, say, the national level in Olympic weightlifting while running ultra marathons, I think that'd be extremely, extremely impressive.
That would be really, really cool to see. 1 second they're on the international stage, weightlifting, the next minute they're running through the mountains on a 100-miler with a backpack.
Right.
With hybrid training, what mistakes do you think people often make Is it the whole, okay, here's a weightlifting program and here's a marathon program. I'm just going to add these together and just see how I go. Are there common mistakes people make when trying to combine developing strength and endurance simultaneously?
Yeah, that's a huge one for sure, especially when people are starting out. And especially so if you're coming from more of the strength side. So if you have a decent strength background, if you've been a weightlifter or a power lifter or done bodybuilding, whatever, and you decide that you want to be a hybrid athlete now, and you're like, I'm just going to keep doing this really intense, bodybuilding program, whatever it is. I'm going to keep doing that and then add this marathon program on top. And then, 3 weeks later, they're like, yeah, cardio kills your gains. That didn't work. It's like, well, obviously not. You can't just take a high level strength routine that you've been building up to for decades and then throw another sport training program on top of it. That's easily going to be too much, especially for someone that has limited aerobic capacity. On the flip side, if you're coming from more of the endurance background, you might be able to get away with kind of just like throwing a bunch of volume at yourself and kind of figuring it out a little bit better. Probably still not ideal, but it'd be a little bit easier coming from that side of things. But that's for sure a huge mistake when people are starting out is they think that they can just combine two different programs and that's going to be sufficient. But especially when you're not used to hybrid training, you're going to have to kind of temper your expectations a little bit, do a little bit less volume of each program, progress on that for a while. Given enough time, you may actually be able to ramp up that volume considerably and eventually reach a point where it does look like just two programs put together. Someone that doesn't realize how much work you've put in, they might look at your training program and be like, wow, how are you managing all of this volume? It seems insane. That much would break me. It's like, well, it would break you initially, but it is something you can build to. So just knowing that kind of takes time to adapt, adjust, be able to manage that fatigue, build up your work capacity and recovery capabilities, all that kind of stuff. So that's a huge mistake. Another huge mistake is just people not knowing how to structure their training week. And they go into certain workouts really, really tired or really, really exhausted. They think that just because they're putting in all of the work, doing all the workouts, et cetera, that they're going to get the results. But, if you're doing a 10, 15-mile trail run, you're exhausted, and then you try to go to the gym a couple hours after that and do your heavy squats, you're probably just not going to feel good and not get a lot out of it. So that potentially is a less common mistake than just doing too much volume overall. But people do make some mistakes in terms of structuring their workouts, ending up too tired, ending up exhausted, and just not getting good quality out of the training sessions.
Yeah, I've seen that quite a lot, especially in terms of managing their week. Because I think with hybrid training, one of the most important things is managing fatigue. Ultimately, there are probably certain sessions where you're going to be pre-fatigued, and there might be a reason why they're pre-fatigued. Or you might distinguish between sessions where you really need to be fresh and sessions which are kind of submaximal and are kind of building up the volume, so it doesn't matter if there's some overarching fatigue from another hot session, which may affect that session, but you're not going maximal in that session anyway, so you don't really notice it. I see that quite a lot on the weekly basis, but I think the most difficult thing with that is trying to manage it on like a monthly or even a yearly basis. What advice would you give someone that is looking to do hybrid training and maintain levels of fatigue that they progress almost linearly, without having, I've done really good for 8 weeks, this is great, and then they just absolutely bonk because they've just thrown a load of volume in, and it gets to a point where their bodies just can't cope, and they start to either break down in performance or it might lead to some kind of injury. What kind of advice would you give for long-term programming and managing fatigue?
Well, overall, I think people often have a misunderstanding about the entire concept of progressive overload, right? So the idea that as you adapt to a particular stressor, as you get fitter, that basically training needs to stay challenging so that you can continue to adapt. And I think people misinterpret that, and they think that means they need to put more weight on the bar every week, or they need to run further every week, et cetera. But it really simply means that training has to remain challenging. And that's all there is to it. It doesn't mean that you have to always progress some particular factor. It doesn't mean you have to always add volume or add weight or whatever. It just means that based on the fitness level that you have, is your training program continuing to challenge you in some way? And when you think about a lot of adaptations like aerobic fitness, for example, or hypertrophy, those adaptations happen very slowly. You're not gaining 10 pounds of muscle between now and next month. It'd be great if we could. It's not going to happen. Same thing with with aerobic fitness. If your VO2 max is 60 right now, it's probably going to be 60 plus or minus a couple of points for a long time. It's probably not going to be 70 by next month. So when you account for that and you think, okay, a lot of these fitness adaptations are changing very, very slowly, I shouldn't expect my training to have to change all that much either to continue to challenge me. But people will have this idea of, progressive overload in their head, and they're like, well, I need to put more weight on the bar. Or I ran 30 miles last week, I'm going to run 35 this week. And they just continue to push and push and push, despite the actual fitness changing extremely slowly. And they just inevitably push to a breaking point, where they either need some sort of extended deload or back off period or whatever. It probably wouldn't have been needed in the first place if they just realized my fitness is moving very slowly, so my training probably should too. So when you get that training plan dialed in to a point where you're like, okay, I feel good, I'm making progress, don't change it. Just stay there for a while. You might see some subtle improvements. You might add some weight here and there or whatever. But by and large, when you find that training program that's working for you and is allowing you to manage your fatigue successfully, don't try to change it too much. Just run with it for a long time. Because if you have that mindset of, excessive progressive overload where you're constantly adding and adding and adding, you will reach that breaking point.
Yeah, I completely agree. I've seen so much of that. People see the mesocycles of, increasing, whether it be volume or intensity, week 1, then you increase it for week 2, for week 3, then you deload and you just repeat that. But they're so focused on that increase in whatever variable that they're focused on that they just end up adding more and more. And you never know if you've adapted from the previous week because you've just made all these big changes and putting the body under a huge amount of new stress. Whereas, if you did the same training program for 2 weeks in a row, you're probably going to see a progression, even though you haven't really changed much. I think Alex Viada made a Instagram post not too long ago about that, about keeping very similar training programs or making very, very small changes because you're going to improve by just doing the work anyway. And by doing that, you then avoid overloading yourself in the long term.
Right. And especially for a hybrid athlete who's managing all these different variables, different types of workouts, fatigue, all this kind of stuff, relying on more auto-regulation strategies, whether it's using RPE or RIR as opposed to just fixed percentages of 1 rep max and like you can do 75% to 78%, now 82% or whatever, instead of having those fixed percentages and planned progressions, just telling someone work up to, a heavy set of 2, ensure you have good bar speed. Some kind of things like that allow people to kind of have that progression mapped out based on how they're actually feeling and adapting to the training program, as opposed to assuming that they're going to adapt in a certain way and potentially progressing either too quickly or too slowly or just in a way that's not appropriate for them. So I'm a huge fan of just using RPE or RIR or other more, subjective intensity scales and that kind of thing to ensure that people aren't trying to do too much or increase too quickly.
Actually, that was going to be my next question. Do you use RPE or RIR? Do you use RPE for both your strength and endurance work?
Yeah. So an RPE and RIR, really, they seek to measure the same thing. They're measuring effort in some kind of way. I find for a lot of beginners, they are often confused by RPE. When you explain the concept, they're like, they view it as almost too subjective or not accurate enough or whatever. Which there may be some elements of truth to that. I'm not too worried about it generally in the long run, but I find that explaining RIR to someone who's just kind of starting out and explaining what intensity means, explaining the concept of an effective set, I find RIR makes a lot more intuitive sense to people when they're first starting out. RPE can be extremely effective as well. So for strength training, I typically use RIR a lot, RPE sometimes. For endurance work, especially of the like speed and interval and tempo variety, I like RPE a lot. When I'm doing more endurance, like true endurance, long aerobic stuff, long runs and the like, I tend to err more on the side of like heart rate and pace zones. I think a lot of times people, especially kind of new endurance training, they're like, well, I ran 20 miles. That was an RPE 9 for sure. Like, no, you were jogging. Like that wasn't an RPE 9. I know 20 miles sucks, but it wasn't that bad. I think people kind of misinterpret it in that context. So generally for like longer aerobic work, I'm using some sort of power zone or heart rate zone or pace zone or that kind of thing. A breathing rhythm, a ventilatory threshold type test. And then for more interval style tempo stuff, run a 5K at RPE 8, that kind of thing. I think it makes a little bit more sense.
And then you monitor what speeds or what heart rates they're running at that particular RPE, and then use that as kind of like a way of monitoring progression. It's like the combination of subjective and objective.
Yeah, and it depends on the type of workout a little bit. For example, the kind of the heart rate limited run is very, very useful. So if we know that your ventilatory threshold is at 150 beats per minute, I can just say, all right, Phil, go run 3 miles or whatever at 100, I think I said 150 beats a minute. And then we can monitor, how quickly are you able to run that distance at that fixed pace. And we can use that as kind of an indicator of progress and overall training readiness and recovery and that kind of thing. And then we could also do that with RPE as well. So if you just every, say, aerobic workout, every Wednesday run, you start out with 1 mile at RPE 7. Let's just see what that looks like on any given day. We could use that as an overall indicator of fitness or training status and recovery as well.
I'm really interested now I kind of know your ideas around training. I want to know what's next after Murph.
Yeah. So Murph has definitely been taking up a lot of my time and attention for the last couple of months. I'm looking forward to getting it over with and kind of moving on to what's next. The last couple of years has been much more focused on the strength side of things for me, putting on some additional muscle mass, that kind of thing. I've not been running all that much or been too worried about my conditioning. So I plan on kind of changing that up a little bit post-Murph. So I'm signed up for the Spartan 50K, Spartan Ultra in Hawaii in August. And then I'm running the Twin Cities Marathon in October. So I put some distance races on the calendar just to kind of force me to get my stride back and run a little bit more. So definitely some long endurance races coming up. I'll continue to work on the strength. I'll continue to do some CrossFit type of stuff. But I am really excited and motivated to build the endurance back up, eventually leading towards the Crucible. So the Crucible is an event hosted by Complete Human Performance every October. And it's kind of the culmination of all things hybrid. So it's 4 events over the course of a month. It's a 30-second bike sprint for max calories, so the famous Wingate test. It's a 1-arm kettlebell long cycle, or what people refer to as the kettlebell half marathon, which is 30 minutes of kettlebell clean and jerk for as many reps as possible. It's a 6-hour endurance run, so as far as you can run, or we have a bike option that we can scale distance with. So 6-hour run or bike, and then lastly a super total. So squat, bench, deadlift, clean and jerk, and snatch, all for your 1RMs. So all 4 of those events put together, ranging from the really short 1RMs and 30-second sprints to more of that mid-range endurance with a 30-minute kettlebell cycle and eventually a 6-hour run. So a lot of different events going on at once, and then all those things get combined into one score. So that's kind of my next truly big thing is end of October with a couple of long runs between now and then.
Wow. What was your score last year at the Crucible?
So I'm proud to say I won the Crucible last year. So overall, I think I took like 7th or something in the powerlifting and the bike sprint, or the super total and the bike sprint. Those were not as good for me. I took 2nd in the kettlebell long cycle and 1st in the distance run. So my 1st, 2nd, and then 2 7th place finishes was enough for an overall win. So this year I'm coming back stronger. So I hope that my bike sprint and super total will be better this time. Hoping for an overall win again, but you never know who's going to show up.
Do you find that because you've been doing Murph, yes, you've been doing some strength work, putting on a little bit of size. People say once you've started adding size, obviously you've got more weight, so that can affect your running ability because every step is going to require more energy because you've got more mass to move. Do you find weight training has a little or big effect, so that you have to deliberately train around to make sure it doesn't affect it too much? Or do you find that actually has no effect at all? Like maybe a lot of your strength gains are based on skill and more neural rather than gaining mass, and you find that you're still able to maintain good endurance in running, despite putting on mass for other skills that you need to do with hybrid training?
Yeah, and there's certainly a cost to added mass, but potential benefit as well. For me personally, I've gained about 20 to 25 pounds or so since my more running focused days, 6 to 8 years ago when I was in the Spartan Pro team and all that kind of stuff. My short distance running, so like my mile times and that kind of thing, have been largely unaffected. My easy aerobic paces have gotten a little bit slower. So like my heart rate controlled runs, a set percentage of my heart rate max and that kind of thing, those are a little bit slower than they used to be, despite my speed times not necessarily changing a whole lot. How much of that is actually related to added mass versus just change in training priorities and that kind of thing is could be up for debate. I think that at the end of the day, when we look at the limits of hybrid performance, people's overall body composition and body size and that kind of thing is going to be one of the biggest limiting factors that we run up against. And we look at how fast can this really strong power lifter be. One of the main limiting factors is going to be, well, how big are they? That's definitely always going to be a huge limiting factor. In kind of small ranges, should you gain 5 pounds of muscle, for example, is that going to slow you down, or what's that effect going to be? Talking about realistic or probable kind of weight gains or losses for the average hybrid athlete. I don't think that those are going to be super significant, given proper training. If you do some hypertrophy work and put on 3-4 pounds of muscle, maybe drop a pound of fat, improve your body composition a little bit, I don't think that's going to, make or break your distance running by any means. More so an issue when we start looking at the extremes of, how fast can this 240-pound athlete still run compared to, the 140-pound marathon and that kind of thing. Huge difference there, of course, in the context, again, of, should you weigh 160 or 165? Should you do a little hypertrophy work this offseason? Whatever. Probably not a huge deal.
Mm. Have you ever had any difficult conversations with new clients at Complete Human Performance where they might be coming to you, they're 230 pounds, they have hybrid goals, they generally have a history of strength training, but, their strength could easily improve, but they, have specific goals in endurance as well. And you think, well, as you start training, you're going to lose a bit of fat, gain a bit of muscle, the weight will probably start to come down. But have you ever had any conversations where, if you want to hit these endurance targets, we want to be in this kind of body weight range here?
I think a lot of people in the more competitive space, especially with the types of athletes we get at Complete Human Performance that are fairly motivated athletes, they're very they're pragmatic and realistic for the most part, in the sense that they know that, if I lost some weight, I would be faster, and that would definitely help. I wouldn't say that conversations have ever been difficult in that sense. But for sure, in terms of just setting realistic expectations, a lot of times people were very gifted, or one sport came very naturally to them. So like, okay, I am going to take up marathon running now. This should be a piece of cake, and it's not. So, having to kind of work with someone who they're struggling and having much more difficulty kind of taking up a particular sport than maybe they thought they would, that can be a little bit challenging when people are frustrated that, how come I'm not seeing progress here? Maybe they were a weightlifter for 15 to 20 years with significant success, and they thought that taking up running would be easy, or vice versa. Just kind of setting realistic goals and realistic expectations for someone of, you're probably not going to hit that goal marathon time that you initially came in with. Progress is going to be a lot slower. Those types of conversations can be a little bit more tough.
Yeah. For anyone that's relatively new to hybrid training, what 3 pieces of advice would you give to them?
Oh gosh, that's a big question. So advice for someone new to hybrid training. I think leveraging some kind of low impact cardio is hugely undervalued. So obviously, if your version of hybrid training is like cycling and lifting or whatever, you're already doing low impact work. But for a huge percentage of hybrid athletes, they're combining some sort of strength sport with running. I highly encourage hybrid athletes to utilize some kind of low impact modality. So whether you're doing recovery rides or some zone 2 work on a bike or an elliptical, doing incline walking, something like that, especially if you're on the heavier side. So if you come from more of a strength background, or you're just a larger, heavier person, those low impact modalities can be really helpful. But even if you're not, I just find it much easier to get in some of that aerobic base work with less kind of interference with how you feel going into strength work if some of that aerobic work is done low impact. So utilize some of that for sure. That's a huge one. Gosh, that's only one of three. I got some more thinking to do. Second one.
If you want to just do two, that's absolutely fine.
So the second piece of advice for someone new to hybrid training, I'll have to go with nutrition on this one. And this could be just as important for someone that's not necessarily a hybrid athlete. You know, nutrition is very, very important for any athlete, single sport athletes included. But especially for a hybrid athlete, making sure you're adequately fueled, hitting your protein targets, getting in plenty of carbohydrates, all of that kind of stuff is super, super important. Basically all the details that already matter, you know, your sleep, your hydration, stress management, like all of those things that are important for any athlete. When you're a hybrid athlete, it just is amplified, right? Like the challenge is combining different sports, managing fatigue, all that kind of stuff. It makes some of those factors that like maybe you could have gotten away with, you know, a little bit less sleep, or maybe you could have gotten away with, you know, not quite hitting your macros as well as you should have or whatever. When you want to be a hybrid athlete, those things matter just that little bit more. So just making sure that you have all those other factors in check, I think is hugely important.
Alec, that's brilliant advice. Great part to end up on. I think that was an absolutely amazing episode because it really allowed us just to see what is required to be a hybrid athlete and how it all pieces everything together. So thank you so much for coming on to the show. If anyone has any questions, where can they find you? And more importantly, if anyone that is listening wants to take part in the Crucible, how do they get involved with that?
Yeah, so follow me on Instagram at Alec Blenis. You can always message me or look at my profile link, all that kind of stuff for information. And then for the Crucible specifically, at Complete Human Performance or CompleteHumanPerformance.com, you can find information on our coaching and the Crucible competition.
Brilliant. Yeah, we'll put everything like that on the show notes and we'll put that all over our Instagram as well to try and encourage as many people to head in your direction. But Alec, that was amazing. Thank you so much for coming on.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Phil. Had a lot of fun.